here's a video about different types of nurses. There are many different types. There are the nerdy types, the talkative types, and what have you. But I'll try to keep this serious. There's what I call the IQ nurse and the EQ nurse, and I think I mentioned this in a couple of videos before because my two units that I work on, one is a pulmonology floor. We were like basically the vanguard of COVID because they're like, oh, you cough. It's something to do with pulmonary. I'm going to throw you guys to the wolves and you guys deal with that. So we were basically, that half of the unit, that half of our group was basically the COVID response. The other half that I spend most of my time now with is the neuro unit. And those are the crazies. The dementias, the CWAS, the stroke, the vascular dementia, traumatic brain injuries, the subdurals, the subarachnoids, the brain cancers, everything that starts messing with the noggin, even electrolyte imbalances and stuff. So you're going to see people start acting a little odd. UTIs, it's anything that they're like they're a little crazy. We stick them on my unit. Even psych patients come there. If they need an IV or something, we get them. All of a sudden, we become psych nurses for whatever reason, although we don't get paid like psych nurses. We do have a psych unit, but those are the voluntaries, the guys that go in and out whenever they want, basically. Us, no, we're the involuntary side, basically, for that portion of stuff. So I was actually trained on the pulmonary side first, and but I was eventually hired for the neural side, and I went to that because I kind of like that better, and I explained it that they're less crazy than my family. My family's insane, so it makes it easier. I go to work for sanity reasons, but the difference in approach in nursing for the two units, even though we're co-units, like you might have the badge that says this unit, but you work. I've known nurses that worked 8 years on my neural unit, but they were actually badged as the pulmonary, and I was like, oh, that's odd. But that's because we switch back and forth all the time, so we're dually trained. But there is preference for one or the other. Nurses will go one way or the other because they're just predisposed to that population of patients. And that's where I differentiate, and I've explained to a number of the newcomers. We've been onboarding a lot of newbies and nursing students that work on, assigned for either unit. I explained to them the neuro unit is very high EQ, emotional intelligence needed. You need to be able to connect with your patients. You need to be able to interact with them, have the patience to deal with that. And it's not stuff you're taught in the book. It is completely experience. It is completely immersive in each patient. You have to learn what triggers them, what doesn't trigger them, how to approach them. It could be there's some as simple as their left field cut, so you approach them from the right. The right field cut, you approach from the left. Stuff like that. They're completely devoid of knowledge of this side, one side or the other, because of whatever brain injury or what have you. Those are textbook stuff. But when they're going crazy on you, they're just ranting and whatever. It's very daunting for newbies to come into that. It's very scary. It's very scary for the families involved. I've seen families just literally curl up and hide and cry in the hallways and run away. They just never come back. It's very scary because this is not the person they're used to. They've grown up with this grandpa or grandma like this for 70, 80 years, and all of a sudden, who's this literally raving lunatic in front of them? That might be temporary. It might be permanent. And it might be for one reason or the other. It could be for a stroke. It could be for a brain injury. It could be for an electrolyte imbalance, something, whatever. Can you cure it? Can you fix it? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Seizure, whatever. There could be a lot of different reasons for it. But, sometimes you have to bring an IQ process to that and say, hey, look, they're in the middle of a stroke. I've seen strokes in situ. I had to call the hospitalist, and it's difficult to diagnose because they had a previous stroke. And they're like, you see this? And then we go through the NIH, and all of a sudden, they right in the middle of the test, they're like, you seeing this right? I was like, that's why I called you. And they're like, okay, CT-arteriogram, let's do emergent this or emergent that. That happens, but pretty rarely. It doesn't, knock on wood. My next assignment, boom, I've got 5 out of 6 coming up, and I can see that totally happening. But, it's a scenario where it's a job where more emotional intelligence is needed day to day. You're babysitting, you're interacting with them, and it's very trying on patients at times. Your patients, and on the patients themselves. But it's definitely a high IQ role that you have to take on. On the pulmonary unit that I work on, it's a high IQ unit. Whenever I'm floated there or work there, they just rotate us because we're supposed to be interchangeable. Not everyone is interchangeable. I'm barely interchangeable. Definitely a round peg in a square hole scenario, but you can fit me through, that kind of scenario. But it requires a higher IQ because it's much more emergent. When someone has difficulties in breathing, it can go bad very quick. And I've always said it's like a fast freight train crash coming on. You're like, oh my God, here it is. What we're gonna do? Whereas on my neuro unit, it's like you see it like 20 miles away. I say, I think that train's gonna derail. What are we gonna do about that? You talk it over and you think about it. You're like, oh, here it comes. So it's gonna be a train wreck. So how do we prepare and deal with that? Whereas the other one hits you like a freight train. I always say like NICU and ICU, it's like a bullet train. I mean, it's already. NICU actually is even worse. It's an airplane crash and you're putting back the pieces. It's already happened. You're happening onto the scene, and you're like, holy crap. You're pulling pieces back together to try to make a human body, or hopefully you could keep it together like that to let it mature for another 12 weeks until it hits minimum gestation, viable gestation levels. That's what my girlfriend does. Thankfully I don't do that. That's why I told her I don't want to do that. For the pulmonary unit that we work on, where it requires a high IQ, you have to respond very quickly. You're keeping an eye on septic levels and electrolytes even more so. Whereas on the other unit, my main unit, I'm like, see what the numbers are in the morning. Let's adjust it. What have you? There, you got to adjust it right away. I need bicarb right now. Boom, boom, boom. And we're gonna deal with it. It's just short of ICU. Usually, a lot of those nurses that go through that unit end up in an ICU. They end up assigned to an ICU. They want to work in the ICU. It would seem like they could be assigned, admitted to the ICU. But no, like step down or ICU, progressive care. It's a very, very, what do you want to call a very technical level of being. And that's what this video is about. It's like, basically 2 different ends of the spectrum. You have high EQ, high IQ. So I've always said, if you want to go to that unit, the pulmonary unit, it's good technical training. And I always say that to the newbies. I said, look, if your eventual goal is ICU, MP, you want to do stuff like that, that's a good unit to train on. Not to kick them out of our unit, but I said, no, I'll give you the straight scoop. I give them honest answers, just like I give you guys. That kind of training is very technical. It's very needed for MPs and hospitalists and trauma. It's like ED work, ICU work. It's very technical based. you gotta keep your eye on the ball, and things can go south very fast. On the neuro unit, yeah, it could go south bad, but more in the sense of like you've got to call security and restrain this person and knock them out, or you know, they're maybe occasionally you're going to have a technical issue, like I said, a stroke or a seizure kind of scenario, but few and far between, hopefully. But that is much more, I think, a unit that suits older nurses. Again, that's the hook of my channel, right? Because we're used to dealing with other people, and that's the people interpersonal aspect that, you know, is the nuance that you're trying to build that relationship up very quickly. You have to learn the person very quickly, and learn the family very quickly, and develop that rapport and interact with them and find out what's going on or how you best serve them, right? Whereas the pulmonary technical side is much more objective. You know, you could check off whatever and follow the rule book, the instruction manual. It's very, you know, like a standard ops a procedure. If you're comfortable with that, that might be better for you. But a lot of the younger crowd, I find, a lot of our younger nurses tend to, I mean, it's a stark divide. Like 80% goes there, 20% comes here. Whereas the older nurses, it's probably like I'm just pulling this number from the sky, 60-40 in that sense. But most nurses tend to like that technical aspect. But definitely with the younger crowd, it's very rare, it's unusual that we see a young nurse pick the neural side, because you're given a choice in our management. Which one do you really want to work for? You know, we want to place you where you want to be. And most of them pick the technical side. One, it's easier for them to follow. They don't have to develop that aspect of their personality, their own personality, to interpersonal relationship, which I find this new generation, younger generation, is unfortunately lacking on. Us older generations and older, that's how we did things. You had to develop a relationship. You had to do that. You had to hone those skills, and you could bring them into play where you work, all the better, right? It's something you've already learned. It's already what you've done, you know, whether it's in relationships of personal or business nature. It translates very well to a high EQ setting. High IQ settings, you know, most people that follow manuals or you know, the younger, like I said, the younger crowd now, younger generations, they can figure out technical manuals a lot easier than us. It's just the way it is. You know, I can barely do YouTube. You know, it's like I said, there's no editing going on here. This is one-shot wonders. Whereas any other channel, you see them do cuts, cues. There's fadeaways. There's ads. There's this and that. Here, you might see a cat walk by in the background. That's it. You know, that's your special effect for the day. Sorry, it is what it is. You know, you're gonna hear my dogs, you know, whining. You know, that's what it is. You know, I've got this angle down at me. That took a few takes. That took a number of videos, guys. You know, it's very limited production values here. So obviously I'm a higher EQ guy than I am an IQ guy. I'm a low IQ guy, a high EQ. So that's something you might want to think about. And that's something where certain units will lend themselves more to that. I find pediatrics is a good blend of both. You must be high IQ there. You're looking at values that change so quickly. Adult humans, we have give and take, whereas little humans do not. Like I said, the NICU, even nothing. There's no, you are already in the borrowed time. You're not even in the red zone, you're gone. You're beyond that. You're trying to get into the red zone so you can get to the green zone, you know, that kind of scenario. But peds also has the element of a high EQ setting. You have to deal with parents that are likely freaking F out. Kids that are likely freaking the F out. Grandparents that are freaking the F out, etc., etc. That's a very difficult environment. That's one of the reasons why I did not go into peds, even though I have a lot of kids. You would think that was an easier, more natural thing. And it might still be for you if that's where your background is. You have a lot of kids, you love kids, you want to do that, that's great. And you have the ability to have both. or some blend of both, you know. It doesn't have to be high and high. It could be medium, medium. It could be still whatever EQ, IQ, you know, scenario. I find ICU, you're going to need high IQ. Very low EQ. I mean, like, most of my my ICU friends are like, and my daughter included, they're like, intubated, sedated. I do not want to talk to these people. You know, put a tube down their throat. That's how I want to talk to you. You know, that's the scenario of EQ of ICUs. ED is a good mix of both. That's like you're dealing with high emotions. You got to suss out what's going on fairly quickly, and you can figure out what nurse is good at what very quickly at that. OR is going to be a high EQ. PACU is going to be a high EQ. IQ. I'm sorry, high IQ. But hospice, high EQ. You know, very high EQ. You got to be very, very high. You're dealing with people passing on, families coming to grips with that. How are you going to handle that? You know, any of the addiction stuff, rehab stuff, high EQ stuff. Not to say that we're dumb nurses and we're whatever, but you're going to need to really lean on that aspect of your skill set, the high EQ stuff. Whereas, like, if you're an ED or a truck nurse or, you know, that kind of thing, where you're going to need a high IQ scenario. School nurse is going to need high EQ stuff. You know, not that they're stupid in nursing and low IQ nursing, but you better have a high EQ to deal with the children involved and the horrors sometimes how you have to deal with that. You know, the dramas and stuff like that. So there's different aspects of nursing. There's many choices, but I find EQ and IQ are basically a quick filter of what you might want to go to or what you might want to think of what your strengths are. You know, you could say, hey, I think I'm a high EQ nurse, but you're going for ICU. They're not going to be too impressed with that. That's why I say OCD nurses are well suited. OCD people are well suited for nursing because ICUs need that. You need to be very, very diligent. You need to be, you know, definitely following that. And even for med surg, a lot of med surg, you need to be diligent with that. You know, and a lot of people have said I'm on OCD, nothing compared to probably my ex, but it suits me or it benefited me when I entered the profession. So hopefully it's, you know, I'm thinking of doing a little bit of a mini series for this, along with like my other series of nursing's, you know, ugly side, good side, all that stuff, beginner nurses. But maybe the types of nurses, this is a good start, I think. EQ versus IQ types of nurses. Okay? Good luck.